To start the Doodle Pumpkin project, first you need to gather your materials. So you need your sketchbook. You can also work on a white sheet of paper. You should never make artwork on lined or gridded paper. There are occasionally projects that involve gridded paper, but this is not one of them. You need a regular pencil that has an eraser or a big eraser. And for this project, you need a marker or a pen. If you don't have markers or pens in your house, you can also use a black crayon or crayons of appropriate color, or you can use colored pencils for this assignment. Okay, I'm going to show you how to draw a pumpkin. You're going to draw at least 3 pumpkins. You can draw more than 3. You can hold your paper long ways or tall ways. Your composition is up to you. I'm going to start by drawing an egg or an oval shape. When I'm sketching, I'm keeping my lines very, very light in case I change my mind about them, so it's easier to erase and they don't show up later. I am drawing a little bit darker than I normally would, just so it will show up on the camera. To make this look like a pumpkin, I need to draw ridge shapes. If it's easy for you to copy exactly what I'm doing, that's fine. If you get the basic technique and you want to make your own pumpkin shapes, that's fine too. They come in all different shapes. Some are tall, some are wide. Sometimes they look really uneven. So I have a combination of ridge lines that I'm keeping and sketchy lines for the sake of communicating clearly the lines that I'm keeping. I'm going to start to erase some of my sketchy lines so you can see those ridge shapes that I've created. I always keep my lines nice and sketchy until I'm sure that I like them where they are. Okay, I'm going to create the stem for my pumpkin. You can make a fancy stem, you can make a little nubby stem. If you want to make the vine still attached, that's fine too. So it's wider where it comes out of the pumpkin and narrower where it turns into the stem. Put some ridge texture on my stem. When you have dashes or gaps between your lines, it means that they are an implied line. Okay, so you need at least 3 pumpkins total. You can certainly have more than 3. I could have them overlap so I can make my next one. Maybe I'll start with like a loaf of bread shape and then put my ridges on it. You'll notice as I'm sketching that I keep my wrist either resting on the table where I'm working or resting on my sketchbook because that helps me to keep my lines more controlled. I'm going to give this a fancy stem. All those little ornamental pumpkins you can get. Put those ridges in it. And I need at least 1 more pumpkin. So I could put one down here that might make an interesting design. When we talk about design or composition, that's how you put together pieces of your artwork. So in a drawing, it's literally where are you drawing things relative to the other things in your drawing and the edges of your paper. You don't want the pumpkin to go off the edge of the paper. I suppose if you had like a whole patch of pumpkins, like way more than 3, then you can have them go off the edge of the paper. So be mindful about where you're placing your pumpkins and make sure you're making choices on purpose. Make it one of those tall, skinny pumpkins. Okay. So here's where we can get creative about the shape of these squashes. We can decide we're going to make them into jack-o'-lanterns if you want, keeping in mind that the end result involves you creating doodle designs in the different sections of your pumpkins. So if you make a jack-o'-lantern face, that is, you're going to have to doodle in the shapes of the face. You don't have to make it a jack-o'-lantern. Let's say I did. So I'm going to draw some eyes and a mouth on this pumpkin. It's going to have a big goofy face. I then want to carefully erase the ridge lines that are in the carved out or negative spaces. I'm going to put some ridge texture, or rather some of that rind texture. So it looks like I'm seeing the inside edge of that pumpkin that's been carved away. Excuse me. Just to give it a little bit more sense of depth. Okay, so after you've sketched your pumpkins with your markers or your pen, you're going to outline all of your lines. If you don't have a marker or pen, remember you can use your crayons that are in your art kit, or you can use colored pencils. I'm going to use my Crayola marker here, and I'm going to trace my pencil lines really carefully, taking my time. And you don't have to color code it, so I'm not saying that you have to trace the stems with green and the pumpkin with orange, but that's certainly a choice you can make. I'll show you an example of tracing everything with the same color in a moment here. I'm going kind of fast. I recommend you work slowly and carefully. So after I trace my green parts, if I do want to color code my lines, so I'm just outlining, I'm not coloring in, okay? I'm going to trace the ridges of my pumpkin. With the Crayola markers, you have to be kind of careful. You have to let them dry before you erase your pencil marks, or you'll smudge the marker and it won't be a good time. Also be aware of where your hand goes. Lefties have a problem with this, where it smudges the marker. So be aware of where your marker is. Where is your hand? Or did you just put the marker? Okay. So if I wanted to color code my lines, that's what I would do. I would trace these other two pumpkins in orange as well. Or maybe I could trace one of them in black as though it's a white pumpkin. I'm not going to erase this right now because I know my marker is wet, but I'm also not going to make you watch me trace these. I'm going to skip ahead like it's a cooking show. So I have an example already made where I've traced all of my lines with the same color of marker, which is definitely a choice you can make. Now what you need to do is, with either that same color of marker or a different color of marker, inside of the shapes, you need to doodle different designs. A shape is the area enclosed by an outline. Okay, so this is one shape, this is a shape, this is a shape. So you need to treat each shape like its own compartment. You're going to doodle designs and patterns in your shapes. Because you're doing this with either a marker or a crayon or colored pencil if you don't have markers at home, there's no take backseat. So be careful, be methodical, think about where you're making your designs and how you're making them. To clarify, scribbles are not patterns or designs. Do not scribble in the shapes of your pumpkins. Try not to have the same pattern side by side. So what I'm doing right now, that's called cross hatching. So I could use that again on a different pumpkin, but I wouldn't want to have two cross hatches right next to each other. So in this part of the pumpkin, I could fill it with spirals. And there will be links and information about how to make different doodle patterns, different references that you can use to make this assignment. When you're done, when you've filled all of your pumpkins with doodles, if you wanted to add a background or create a scene, that is up to you. I think now I'm going to fill it with lines going all diagonally. Try to make your marks. So make my diagonal lines here go from side to side within that pumpkin. Within that shape of the pumpkin, rather. If I have really teeny weeny slices, like this little piece right here, I'm going to put little polka dots. Okay. I can do hatch marks that go one way and then go the other way. I've got a little tiny marker bit outside of that component. That's okay. Tiny, tiny, tiny mistakes. And I can fill these in like a checkerboard. So I'm not going to make you watch me fill these with doodles. That's not a good use of your time. But I will post the completed example to Classroom. You need to fill all of the shapes of your 3 pumpkins, including the stems. And if you did choose to make a jack-o'-lantern face, including the jack-o'-lantern face with doodles and designs and patterns, not scribbles. Okay? All right, take your time. Good work takes time. Don't forget when you're done. If this were finished, I would photograph it, crop it, right? So it's just the picture of my artwork, and rename it so it's the same file naming format. The year you will graduate from high school, your first initial last name, your homeroom teacher's last name, and then the words Doodle Pumpkin.